Okay, guys, so welcome to today's Sovereignty. My name is Magnus again. Today we're joined by Brian Harrington, Edan Yago for a fascinating Twitter discourse. Ladies and gents, don't forget that Twitter spaces are actually interactive, so we will be taking questions at the end. You can also submit questions anonymously. We'll just click on the link in our latest tweet. Getting loads of anonymous questions. I can tell people like those, huh? And yeah, so if you're an avid listener of Sovereignty, you'll know I like to start things off with a joke as a little icebreaker. So here we go. Why did the blonde chew on nickels? She heard she could become rich from Bitcoin. Thank you, folks. Thank you. All right. So, guys, let's get rolling today. So, Brian, we'd love to get an update from you. I hear you've been Citadel building. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yes, exactly. I have the week off right now. Just been hanging out in my Citadel, which has felt very great and refreshing. Yeah, I've never had a backyard before, so I'm just trying to cram as much cool stuff into it as possible. So right now I'm getting a patio laid down. That's what's happening.
All right. And Yago, anything else exciting and new for you at the moment?
Well, I'm not going to talk about myself for a second, because I think that there's a lot going on that is exciting and that is bigger than any of us right now. So, um, the last week has been an amazing education. It's been, a master course in the reality of where we are. I think we are at a unique junction in time. The Most people go through sort of life without really having that much impact on how things play out, or even being at a time when anyone has much impact on how things play out. But I think right now we're at a very, very critical junction. So there's several things that are happening at once. One is that Ethereum is about to shift to proof of stake. Uh, this is a system where, first of all, it requires a hard fork. There's a contentious hard fork with miners looking to create their own chain. And at the same time, in the same week, we've got two other crucial things happening. One is Tornado Cash has been sanctioned. So a smart contract for the first time has been sanctioned by OFAC, which is the US sanctions list. And so a whole bunch of DeFi dApps decided that they wouldn't allow access to transacting with Tornado with addresses that had used Tornado. And one of the first ones to respond was USDC, right, which is partly Coinbase. And they decided to blacklist $70 million that were held of USDC that were held in that contract became inaccessible. So two things are crucially happening in the Ethereum ecosystem right now. And I don't know if you guys have been watching the debate as it's been unfolding. A lot of it is happening on Twitter. But if Ethereum hard forks into proof of stake, and the primary stakers, the vast majority of stakers, are fairly centralized US and to a great extent US entities, right, that are already sanctioning OFAC, or they're already sanctioning one smart contract, and will be under pressure potentially to sanction transactions occurring on, just generally on the chain. Then this is a direct path to a chain like Ethereum becoming effectively a KYC AML sanctioned chain. And the choices that we make, like all of the people on the call, all of the people in crypto, in terms of the systems that we choose to use over the coming few years, are going to have a very, very big impact on the direction that the political and geopolitical future of the world takes. Is it going to be a continuation of what we have, with a relatively small set of insiders being able to censor the vast majority of humanity? And now with the additional power of blockchain, or is it going to be a more decentralized rules-based system? And I don't think that at any point in time has been as obvious as it is now, that, with Ethereum, the second largest chain, and potentially a future dominant chain, and the chain with the most economic activity on it, potentially, already displaying ways in which it could be controlled, centralized, and sanctioned. I think that the importance and the reality of the fact that we are living through a really, really important time and the choices that we make actually matter. I don't think it's ever been as obvious to me, and I think to a lot of people. So that's what I've been paying attention to over the last few days.
Any thoughts on that on your end, Brian?
Yeah, no, that's deep, and well said. So this doesn't directly correlate to what Yago was saying, but something that I've just been thinking about a lot is, and kind of back to just sovereign, being a sovereign individual. And when Yago came on my podcast and talked about Bitcoiners need to understand the systems that are out there better than the proponents of those systems. And that conversation, among other conversations, and everything that has happened on Twitter in the past few weeks, has caused me to just really think and ask myself a lot of deeper questions. And I've wanted 2022 as a year to be just kind of a reset year for myself, and trying to think about things differently and newly, with new eyes. And so, yeah, I've kind of just been putting tweets out all morning about just different things I've been thinking about. And I have to admit off the top, I haven't done a good job of really thinking about what is a smart contract? What is a DAO? What are the trade-offs on tokens versus startup equity? And the reason why kind of those things and the drama around those things matter, and how they're connected to what Yago talked about leading off, is because you're right. OFAC sanctioning a smart contract, what is that? What is that? We have to redefine. We are redefining every single word right now. I liked how I said our decisions matter. To me, I've said this to myself, but I want to live it out more in my life. The old world doesn't work. It doesn't have any solutions. So, and what you're right, what we're seeing right now is the old world colliding with the new world and trying to force a square into a round hole. And that's where the rub is right now. And everyone is choosing with their decisions every day, kind of how to react to it. And so it's made me realize that the sovereign individual thesis can't play out without also reworking what a company even is. Because humans have to, Bitcoin allows humans to better interact with each other through money, the communication tool, the negotiation tool, communicating value. Bitcoin helps humans interact better together. And as I experience that freedom and experience that clearness of mind of how to now negotiate with my neighbor and negotiate with my community, it makes me realize all the other friction that's available. The current startup model of angel investor, Series A, Series B, Series C, and then dumping on the public, that system of humans interacting with each other, a lot of software companies say, we want to change the world, we want to put a dent in the world, we want to democratize this, we want to democratize that. But is the way we're even organizing as humans set up to even achieve that end means? Peter Thiel said at the Bitcoin 2022 conference, the public stock market is quasi-government controlled. And so if all our companies building Bitcoin and crypto things are going the same funding route of startup, Series A, Series B, Series C with the goal of selling to the public market, which is government controlled. How is the sovereign individual thesis going to play out? And so that I'm working through all of that in my brain right now, and it ties to what's happening with the smart contract, because the smart contract hit a nerve with the establishment, with the current people that have power in this world. And so that's a summary of kind of everything ping-ponging around in my brain.
So for me, zooming out, the big thing that I've been battling with internally over the last, watching this happen, is that I am concerned that we are sleepwalking into giving up a massive opportunity. And the massive opportunity is to create a rules-based system without rulers. And the reason we're sleepwalking into that is because the two most dominant systems, the two most dominant communities, have both abandoned the mission. Bitcoin has abandoned the mission, and Ethereum has abandoned the mission, but we've abandoned the mission in different ways. So the Bitcoin community, at least as it's represented by what I think is becoming an increasingly problematic sort of voice within Bitcoin, the Bitcoin maxi community has chosen to reject all forms of smart contracts and tokenized assets because they can't be built on Bitcoin in its current form. And as a result, they represent sort of the other. And partly for a good reason, which I think shouldn't be discounted, which is that if you start introducing changes into a system, or you introduce more complexity into a system, you don't know what the game theoretic result is. I think there are solutions there, like building on layer 2, but putting that aside, Bitcoin has chosen a path of providing a rules-based system in a very, very limited fashion. Right? The rules are only around who holds and who transacts in Bitcoin. Ethereum are sleepwalking in a different way. So Ethereum have substantially expanded the realm of things that can be governed in a decentralized way, can be managed and created in a decentralized rules-based system. What a smart contract is, and this is one of the questions you asked, what is a smart contract? A smart contract is an opt-in set of rules. That's all it is. And a smart contract governs how the participants are able to interact. So Tornado Cash is a set of rules around depositing ETH, who can deposit ETH, who can withdraw ETH, or who can deposit USDC, and who can withdraw USDC, and then also a set of rules about how those ETH or USDC will be changed. And the way they're changed or interacted with is zero knowledge proofs anonymize who the depositor was and who is withdrawing, right? So basically a very, very powerful privacy tool. So that's what it is. It's basically a mini government, right? Which deals with a specific thing. And in this particular case, it's privacy. So Ethereum created a platform which allows you to deal with all of these things and to create a rules-based system which extends far beyond the transacting of one particular asset. However, what they seem to have abandoned is a strong focus on maintaining a high degree of incorruptibility, right? So so Bitcoin, the base system, highly incorruptible, but can't do an expansive amount of things. Ethereum expands the list of things that cannot be corrupted, but build it on a foundation or on a core system, which is potentially at great risk of corruptibility. And unfortunately, I don't think either of the communities recognize or are willing to admit how each of them sort of have one half of the puzzle. And what we really need to do is combine both parts so that we have a base system which is incorruptible. And on top of that, we build an entire world of additional incorruptible systems which are more specific or application specific.
Mm-hmm. I want to talk about how, so rules-based system with no rulers and two most dominant cryptocurrencies abandoning the mission. The reason why I am also trying to throw in kind of just how startup financing works and kind of how crypto gets built, quote unquote, into the mix is because you're right. Every one of these people making decisions every day are humans. And if the funding, let me sidestep one other thing that I want to say. One thing that I think Ethereum messed up on that makes it hard to kind of take the current set of DAOs and current set of DeFi seriously is I hate that they use the word hack whenever something goes wrong. I love your simple definition. A smart contract is an opt-in set of rules. Sweet. Love it. When a quote-unquote hacker uses the opt-in set of rules to take a flash loan from here and do XYZ and pull funds out over here, to me, that is not maybe I'm glossing over too much, but to me, that's not that's not a hack. That's the smart contract needed to have better rules so that that outcome that we don't want didn't happen or whatever. So that's one thing. And it all goes back to...
I have a word for you if you want, which can replace hack.
Hit it.
So anyone who's played Dungeons and Dragons knows most people play Dungeons and Dragons because they want to have fun with their friends and roleplay a bit, right? But there's always this guy, usually it's a guy, right, who has read the rule book 3 times, and all he's doing is mini-maxing his stats points so that he can manipulate the rules of Dungeons and Dragons to get the most treasure, get the most XP, and win. In Dungeons and Dragon community, they have a name for this kind of behavior. It's a munchkin. People who do that are munchkins. Mm-hmm. And I think, Wall Street are basically, they've munchkined our financial
100%
set of rules. And these hackers, so to speak, these aren't hacks. These are munchkins. Your smart contract got munchkined.
Yeah. And I think, so I almost feel and then to the rules, not rulers thing. Humans are still community-led people, and charisma and leadership is a very real thing. The American Revolution would not have happened. Any revolution would not have happened without individuals that said things at certain times. Or one thing that really always bothered me about Occupy Wall Street is no one would say something. No one would have charisma to go on TV and say something good. Or another example, when the whole GameStop thing happened, GameStop versus the hedge funds, that's a very valiant mission, right? And I go inside the Reddit rooms and I'm what's the plan? What's the end game? How are we coordinating? And no one could say anything intelligible. That is often to me what it feels like. I've tweeted this out. I like the way you just talked about how Bitcoin has one half of the pie and Ethereum has one half of the pie. And I think just 2022, we're at just this great crossroads of people are asking for solutions. They're asking people overarchingly are just looking at the options of things. In my opinion, and maybe this sounds dumb and dumbed down, but to me, I don't know who to follow in Ethereum or in smart contracts or any of this stuff, because it is almost there is a thing that the biggest accounts in both camps are kind of their funding is tied to the old way of doing things. That, I think that truly is happening. And there hasn't been a DAO because of what I just brought up about hacks. There's not a great DAO or a great tool to point to that has fully done this. I think the ones that have gotten like the closest and honestly aren't super talked about like as smart contracts, I think are these mixers, like in the coin join services. Because what happens is you have people that came together that put software on the internet and then they get paid from the software on the internet. I think those projects, and that's ironic that like this Tornado Cash, I don't know, I understand the way that the CoinJoin implementations are built better than I do, still not an expert, but better than how Tornado Cash was built. But like pulling out the way, like there's small projects that got built and the person got paid. I think sometimes these DAOs and these DEXs and all these things that are trying to get built, they're trying to do too much at one time. And I used to think that the word like tokenomics, like I thought that was a joke. I didn't know that was like a serious thing. Understanding all the game theory and understanding all the things of like tokens are an alternative to regular startup financing because they're building software that the establishment doesn't want to be written, which is a valiant goal. But then there's no, like there's not one great example to like point to as a tipping point yet. So I think that's where that's factoring into everything. Like I wish, and kind of that, like I wish this Tornado Cash guy had been more famous before this all happened. Like I wish he would kind of, like we need people to be leaders, like and have charisma and publicly think and talk about things. So I don't know. That's just kind of my reaction to like rules-based systems with no rulers. Like I'm down and I get it, but the world is also like very, very muddy. And like my two conversations with you and my like, I feel like the conversations that need to be had, the overlap conversations that need to be had are still just being sidelined by just like greater forces almost, it feels like.
Well, I think nuance is always difficult to come by. And I think that's true in everything. And it's particularly true as things get bigger and more popular. I mean, think about the high degree of nuance that comic book fans are able to talk about comic books, which, whatever. It's like not particularly important, but they know everything. Or, people who are fans of Lord of the Rings. They can quote you Quenya, right? They can explain to you exactly why, different fan theories, right? But those communities that are started by geeks, when they become popular, by nature of becoming popular, they become interesting to a mass of people who are not geeks, who are not interested in the nuance. And we've seen the same thing happen in Bitcoin, and we've seen the same thing happen in Ethereum. And that isn't a surprise.
Yep.
So the thing is, though, that both Bitcoin and Ethereum are still mostly managed by geeks.
Mm-hmm. Can I draw another parallel out of that? Sure. I think that happens everywhere. Like I think that happens back in legacy world, like politics also. Like you're not able, whenever a quote unquote movement branches to the next level, it loses its salt. And so I think it's interesting watching it like replicate again here. But yeah, keep going, because I want to know, like what is an example of that is like the billionaires. Like the billionaires are politicians and our billionaires in the legacy world, and this is, everyone knows this, but like they don't want it enough. Like they don't want to change the world enough. They're entrenched. Like that's what the definition of entrenched is. And so yeah, it's interesting that geeks or whatever, so a subculture is created with a greater mission, but then there's never, like, we don't have a great example. We have very few examples of subcultures that have grown while retaining its like ability to actually put a dent in the current status quo. So I feel like that's what's happening also right now with
No, I totally disagree. I totally disagree with you on that. So coming back to comic book fans, comic book fans were geeks who, were really interested in this niche hobby. And today that niche hobby, 9 out of 10 of the biggest movies every single year are basically catering to their niche hobby. Bitcoin and Ethereum were niche hobbies. Today they're worth billions, trillions, depending on the day.
Yep.
So I don't think that, I actually think that geeks are the only people who change the world. And the fact that the masses aren't aware or aren't interested in nuance is almost irrelevant.
Mm-hmm.
I'm much more worried when the geeks are infiltrated by munchkins, because munchkins are as familiar with nuance as geeks, but they have no souls.
That's a fair analogy. So you believe the geeks are being infiltrated by munchkins, or do you believe the geeks are hitting a certain status and becoming munchkins?
I think it's a bit of both.
Yeah, because that could be, dude, honestly, that could be what it took this much of the conversation to get to. Because I have written down, I would most likely, and maybe it's just from what I've observed, I'm observing geeks turning into munchkins.
Yeah, I think that's true. Look, I've been in Bitcoin long enough that I've known a lot of people who have become very, very wealthy. And a lot of them were amazing people who, I thought were paragons of, just nice, moral, ethical people.
Mm-hmm.
And I've seen a lot of them kind of become shits.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of them are running the companies that people are using today as like the major services, like the exchanges and the wallets and all of that. And there's part of the reason for that is you can only optimize for so many things. If you're optimizing for growth or profit, trying to also optimize for principles typically gets in the way.
100%. Which is, I guess why I kind of just vomited all the like startup funding stuff at the beginning, because that's finally been like where the party line is that tokens are bad. And like, I'm now at this point where I'm asking the question publicly, why are how are tokens bad, but startup equity isn't bad? Like that, to me, that doesn't make sense anymore. Like I'm ready to just start at the ground floor, first principles of both of those.
Great. Awesome. I think that's, and I think
because then that leads to the geeks becoming munchkins thing. Like and that's where if a DAO does work and can work, then the evidence of that will be in less geeks becoming munchkins, right? Like that would be an evidence point of that.
Right. So like one of the small cultural changes that I think can happen in Bitcoin to allow Bitcoin to offer us both parts of the pie, and I think is starting to happen. It's happening to you. It's happening to other people, and I think it's happening because of the efforts of a few geeks. If you think about Udi Wertheimer, right?
Yep.
For those of you who know who Udi Wertheimer is, he was, major anti-ETH, anti-token, Bitcoin maxi troll a year ago. Now spends most of his time trolling Bitcoin maxis, and I think because of conversations he's had with people, who are my type of geek, including myself, he came to realize that if Bitcoin doesn't offer both sides of the pie, we potentially lose the whole game. And I think the same kind of realization is now starting to take hold in Bitcoin. So I think geeks matter.
Yep.
I think the people and individuals matter.
Yep.
Right? And so I think that there's a very, very positive thing happening right now in Bitcoin. And the fact that you say, yeah, I'm open to DAOs, I'm open to smart contracts, I'm open to tokens. If that takes hold, with the people on this call and with more calls, and it becomes a major narrative in Bitcoin, I think our chances of really having a lasting and positive impact of creating a world of rules without rulers grows exponentially.
And the way that we continue that momentum is by kind of like, you know how you said, like, we have to understand the way the other system works more than the proponents of that system. And this is me saying, I didn't know enough about how startup funding works and how public markets works and how like founders like and their boards interact. So I didn't know what is a DAO trying to solve. You know what I mean? And there's not enough people running around the internet explaining it in those terms. Like I can perfectly explain through all the Sunday school podcast classes that I took why Bitcoin is better than central banking. Like I have that down. But there's very few people that can explain why tokens are better than traditional startup funding because of XYZ, like geeks becoming munchkins. You know what I mean? And that story, like that narrative, is not being told enough.
Well, Brian, maybe invite me on again and let's make that the topic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%. Why do you think? Do you have any reason to that? Like, why do you think? Like, why do you think that story hasn't been able to be told?
Yeah, I absolutely have a sense of. I mean, I think the main reason is this. So you're a true believer in Bitcoin, right? And you want and you see the corruptibility at the base of other systems, and you want to keep people away from that. And selfishly, you also want NGU, right? You want your Bitcoin to increase. All right. So psychologically, emotionally, like all of your incentives are aligned with this idea that everything that is happening outside of Bitcoin is dangerous. It eats at Bitcoin's network effect. It means that value that could be going into Bitcoin is going elsewhere, and potentially it creates network effects of other systems which could compete or overtake or sort of co-opt the mission. And so you start saying all of this stuff is shitcoins. EVM is dangerous. Ethereum hasn't done anything good. It's a scam. It's all a scam. Fuck these scammers. And then,
for sure.
And then simple people, right, who have, come into this maybe just because they have a dream. They're a bit helpless or hopeless. Life is difficult now for a lot of people. They've taken a big bet. They want to take they want to take the simplest bet they possibly can. Simplest bet you can possibly take is Bitcoin.
Yep.
And so every time they see somebody saying this, they upvote it, they like it, they retweet it because it flatters their preconceptions.
Dude, so I think that's for sure 100%. That is for sure happening. What I'm also asking is from the alternate side, why that's for sure happening. But also from the opposite side, why is it not being communicated that just the argument, like back to that of like startup, like the way the legacy world does startup financing leads to companies that aren't able to put a dent in the world. Like, why isn't that being communicated? And then also, I'll add on to this. I think there's also an element. I think there's also an element of not believing that we have to rebuild all of it. It's like the classic debate between can reform in the current system work, or do you have to build a new system? Like, and there is still a lot of us, and just as humans, even going broader than cryptocurrency, like we still hold on to the comfort of like the paradigms that we grew up with. And so having to believe that, holy shit, we have to rebuild all of it. All of it was a lie. Like all of it was corrupted all the way to the bottom. That's like very, very earth shattering. Like, and so major credit to Bitcoin and crypto people in general for being decently far along that path in general. So that's a unifying message, like back to the thing of just like getting people to understand both sides and coming together. But yeah, that's what I would add onto the conversation is I still want to know how, like, where the shortcomings have been on explaining the funding part. But then, yeah, do you agree with the like hesitancy that we didn't know we had to rebuild all of it?
Look, I think there are lots of reasons why this has happened, but I think maybe the base reason is because this is complicated stuff and it takes time for complicated ideas to be properly propagated, especially in a world of 240 character limit. so um, so I think conversations like this are happening more and more. There's more and more people who are trying to discuss a more expansive view of Bitcoin. This is quite new. I mean, that conversation always existed in Bitcoin, but to a great extent, it was shut down due to the civil war of the block size war. But I think it's coming back, and it's hard to keep a good idea down.
Totally. No, what like
maybe we should open this up to our audience.
Yeah, we have plenty.
Yeah,
of
I'm
people.
down. I'm in a very yeah.
Oh, sorry, I think there was a delay. Yeah, so we have someone who's been waiting for ages now. Offlow, I'll give you a chance to speak right here. I'll add you as a speaker. You have the floor, Offlow, if you want to go ahead and ask your question. Go ahead and unmute yourself.
My first question for you, Yago, is I like the RSK technologies. I think it's a great experimentation. I think that it has a lot of good things going for it. And I was actually in a debate the other day, and one of the debates occurred. It was basically, I think, against probably like an Ethereum person. I don't know what representation, but they said that they would be worried for RSK if OFAC chose to ban RSK. And my question for you is, how would you respond to the banning of RSK by OFAC if that ever occurred, even though I doubt that it would ever occur?
Well, I don't know exactly what banning RSK means, but let me try and offer the worst possible scenario, which is that OFAC decide that the rootstock peg shouldn't, shouldn't exist, or it should be banned, right? And that could lead to two things. One is that wallets or exchanges will refuse to send transactions to the peg. That's relatively easy to overcome. More difficult is that if you've used the peg, they won't accept your Bitcoin. Also possible to overcome. By the way, I don't think this is going to happen. I think this is extremely unlikely. Third thing that could happen is that they try to go after the validators. And then they managed to go after the validators, even though they're many pegnatories. These pegnatories are in different countries. Some of them are pseudonymous, but they managed to get to enough pegnatories and put enough pressure on them that the pegnatories stop operating. What would happen then is that the peg would stop working for a year. The funds would then be, after a year, transferred over to a different address. And from there, a new setup could be created, or they could be transferred back to users. This would be an extremely messy process, and it points to the biggest weakness in rootstock, which is the federated peg mechanism. Now, I think the POW peg is by far the best federation we've ever built, but it's still a federation, and the only way we get away from that is by introducing a change to Bitcoin. And I think this is basically the only and last change we ever need to introduce to Bitcoin, which allows for trustless peg in and peg out from Bitcoin. You do that, you can now create anything you want on layer 2. You never need to change layer 1 ever again, because layer 1 can see all of its experimentation, all of the permissionless development, all of the scale occur on layer 2. And basically layer 1 becomes this sort of law of nature, as unchanging as gold or as the sun.
What is this change you're speaking of?
Well, it would require two types of, there are various versions. Paul Stork has BIP 300 and BIP 301, which is a methodology called drive chain. Drive chain would work. I don't think it's the best solution. I think the best solution is to introduce two types of upcode, one around covenants, and the second around reading zero knowledge proofs. Internally in Sovryn, we are currently working on putting together BIPs around both of these things. I think that allows you to use pure trustless cryptography to pool Bitcoin. So pool, right? Not P-U-L-L, but P-double-O-L, right? So to have multiple people share a trustless, cryptographic rule-based peg or pool, and the Bitcoin moves according to the cryptographic rules.
Okay. When you say covenants, which covenants are you talking about? Are you talking about BIP 119? What?
No,
Which?
BIP 119 is a step in the right direction, but wouldn't go far enough. We would need to have some slightly more advanced covenants than that. I don't have a BIP to point to yet because no one's written it.
Are you still there? I can't hear you for some reason.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I can hear you.
All right. Well, in any event, the BIP hasn't been written yet, but there are people in Sovryn working on it as well as Bitcoin Core
Can you
developers.
guys hear me? Are you guys still there?
Bitcoin Core developers who are working on it. Okay, maybe we should move on to Sergey.
I'm going to try and leave and come back.
All right, Sergey, you have the floor. If you want to unmute yourself, go ahead. Oh, he's gone. All right, that's no worries, guys. We have plenty of anonymous questions. Let me just grab a couple here. One was delving on, one said, can the U.S. do to Sovryn what was done to Tornado Cash? What are the risks to stakers, project contributors, and people with zero loans?
Yes, so Sovryn is being built. So look, the US can add to their OFAC list anything they want, right? The problem with adding Tornado Cash to OFAC list wasn't with Tornado Cash. Tornado Cash works perfectly fine. The problem with adding Tornado Cash to OFAC was how the rest of the ecosystem reacted. And the way the rest of the ecosystem reacted was there were two things, right? First, centralized stablecoins canceled the dollars, basically stole the money that was in the contract. Second, other so-called DeFi protocols, which were not truly decentralized, started either on their front end or the smart contracts themselves started to reject transactions with Tornado Cash, and worse, they started to reject transactions from wallets that had transacted with tokens that had been in Tornado Cash. So one of the things that happened was that someone started sending, $100 worth of ETH to prominent Ethereum influencers, and then these prominent Ethereum influencers were no longer able to interact with, let's say, Aave, right? One of the biggest DeFi lending dApps out there. So OFAC can definitely list Sovryn. They're less likely to in the short term, but that's not neither here nor there. The more important thing is that Sovryn is being designed as an ecosystem to be robust to this kind of thing. By itself having a decentralized governance, by interacting with other systems which have decentralized governance, and perhaps most importantly, by working to build a system which has no external dependencies. And the most important external dependency is centralized stablecoins. So already, Sovryn is already partly protected through XUSD. And with the introduction of the sovereign dollar soon, which I expect will be in about 2 months, there'll be a Bitcoin-backed, truly decentralized stablecoin, which will become the canonical stablecoin in Sovryn. The second important thing, the second important externality is the actual fundamental system that you're working on. And Sovryn is secured by and its transactions are confirmed by Bitcoin proof of work, which is incredibly robust. And so that and additional things in that vein, right, by reducing and having a very, very strong focus on reducing corruptible externalities, you're able to create an ecosystem which is very, very secure. And then later on, down the, as the technology matures, we'll also be able to add anonymization by default. And then with that level of privacy, corruption becomes even more difficult.
Thank you for that. Sergey, did you want to ask your question? You can unmute yourself. Sergey, go ahead and unmute yourself if you can hear me.
Hello, can you hear me?
Correct.
Yep.
Yes, you can.
Can I ask my question?
Yep. Go for it.
So my question is, partnership is always an important factor for every project. So who is your partner? What are the benefits you get from those relationships? This is my question.
Sovryn doesn't have any partners as such because Sovryn is a decentralized protocol, and decentralized protocols can't have partners. In fact, it would be very problematic if they could have partners because you need to make commitments to a partner, and a rules-based system can't make those kinds of commitments without going through at least the rule-based structure. So that said, there's a lot of projects that work with Sovryn, that integrate Sovryn, right? In the same way that Bitcoin doesn't have partners, it has integrations. We have fiat on and off ramps. We have privacy tools. There are wallets. There are data analysis tools, and there are other applications like Babelfish and like HODL that are being built in the Sovryn ecosystem. So I agree that building an ecosystem and having a large number of players, including large players, work with whatever it is that you're building is extremely important. However, it hasn't been a major focus for the Sovryn community or the Sovryn core team, because right now our mission is primarily hardening ourselves against corruptible externalities. And once that work is more advanced, and it's getting there very, very quickly, especially with the recent introduction of Bitcoin-backed stablecoins, then it becomes easier to invite larger players into the environment because they no longer have the power to corrupt the environment.
Brian, did you want to add something? I
have a question. I have a question off that too, but Sergey can ask another one if he has follow-up.
Okay.
So my follow-up off of that is Yago. I love talking to guys like you about and I want to do it more about mapping DAOs and DeFi to meet space. And so I think so we're at a critical point right now. People are rethinking what tokens are, rethinking what DAOs are, rethinking why we need DAOs, what they improve on, what smart contracts improve on over the legacy world. One way that I think then more and more people continue to get involved then is when I can go and get just a mortgage, just the classic case, but just a loan of any kind, mapping the loan to meet space. Do you agree that that's a way that is going to get more people involved? For example, I used HODL lending to take a loan. I needed to pay a painter who was working on my house, but then I still had to I had to find a guy from Meetup to swap out the stablecoin, for cash, pay the painter. So I did the flow as far as mapping, a DeFi-ish application to meet space. Do you foresee that becoming bigger and some of these mortgage companies then plugging into Sovryn as their backend, or what? I like how you explained the roadmap of just becoming hardened to corruptibility, and then how are do the lenders that map to meet space then also have to be incorruptible, or how does that plug into Sovryn or any DeFi in a larger sense?
Yeah, so mortgages is definitely something which I think will come to Sovryn. And there's a number of ways in which it could happen, but I'll talk to you about what I see as the most perfect way. And I think this is when we talk about building an economy around Bitcoin, building an economy, with Sovryn. This is one of the primary things that I think about. Okay, so people think about real estate as the most canonical example of something that can't be on a blockchain because it's purely meat space. But that's actually not true. And the reason it's not true is because the land is in the meat space, but people don't buy land. What people buy is the right to land. In other words, what they're buying is title, and title exists in the imagination of men and is written down in databases, which are called land registries.
Yep.
So what if you were to take a land registry and you were to, instead of having it in a centralized database, you would have it on a blockchain. And that becomes not just a representation of land title, it becomes the representation of land title. That becomes the canonical in-law representation of who owns what land. And now land title is represented by NFTs. Okay, so let's say I want to take out a mortgage. Okay, I create the smart contract, or I utilize the smart contract. The NFT plus my down payment go into a smart contract, which is a lending pool. It acts as collateral, and then the lenders provide the rest of the funds, and those funds go to the person selling the NFT. And now I am the owner of the house or the land or whatever it is. I didn't need a court to get involved. I didn't need an agent to get involved necessarily. I mean, obviously, most people want some kind of intermediary to go through that process with, but it could be highly automated.
Yep.
And now I also unlock the ability to do all kinds of crazy things that we can't even imagine with that asset that I can't do today.
Yep.
So that's that. When I think of Sovryn providing tools as an operating system for a rules-based finance or for sound finance, that is, I think, one of the big examples.
No. So perfect. And I'm sure you've thought all the way out to this. So let's just continue the flow. So the flow you just described is perfect. But then, then eventually you need like state has monopoly on violence, and that state monopoly on violence references the written down database of the current registry. And so that's what you're buying. You're buying the written down registry that has the state sanctioned violence to protect, quote, protect the property, right? So this then gets into what Balaji is writing about building network states, right? And eventually, that's then the next. So the finance flow is honestly kind of funny. That's the easier side to create, but then creating social consensus for that and having people willing to respect that as the thing. What are your thoughts on that?
The first talk I ever gave at a Bitcoin conference, also I think was the second Bitcoin conference ever, was a conference in San Jose in 2013. And my topic was not Bitcoin. My topic was competitive governance and free cities. Mm-hmm. And that's something I've been involved in for well over 10 years now. And the reason I think that's important is because I think everyone at this point knows that our systems are crumbling. But why are our systems crumbling? Our systems are crumbling because they're monopolies. Monopolies do not change. They don't want to change. And as the world changes around them, they become increasingly inflexible and increasingly obsolete, right? We don't need to look far back, just COVID, to just see how incredibly obsolete our current set of monopolies are. And you were talking about the monopoly of violence, right? So I think one of the things that is missing in our world, maybe the most important thing that is missing, is competitive governance, or for us to have a frontier, a way for us to experiment with new forms of governance. And so my view of this is, and one of the reasons I'm excited about Sovryn, is because Sovryn is more than just an opportunity to build a environment of rules-based sound finance. It's also an opportunity for people who care about this kind of stuff to come together, to meet each other, to have shared goals, and to have shared economic incentives. And I haven't become less interested. I've only become more interested in creating competitive governance. And I think that as a community, as we grow, as our tool set grows, as the community grows, we will have the ability to go from being a cloud nation to being a cloud nation with physical space, with a capital city in the real world, where we can try these things and show how they outcompete everything that our current set of monopolies have. And I don't even think we need to have a monopoly on violence. I think we can, this is a much bigger question, much bigger point. But I believe in a world in which there is the returns in violence are so low.
Exactly.
Yeah. So
you'll know where the Bitcoiners live because the roads work better in that part of town. Like, it'll just be so obvious. And so what you just did, like, through this whole like session, is you, like, as a leader with charisma, painted a big mission. And I think that, like, back to the start of the conversation, like, to me, that's what's missing. Like, I don't hear that enough from enough people, that, like, what is the end game, and just like hammering the end game, hammering the end game, hammering the end game. And there's too much talk about just details between like this DeFi protocol versus this DeFi protocol. When as you said, like, we're at a pivotal point on, like, are we going to put a dent in meat space or not, is a way more interesting conversation to me than like the threads of like this DeFi protocol versus another DeFi protocol.
Right, and I'm guilty of that as well. I would like to paint this bigger picture.
And it matters. I don't mean to brush over that. Like, the computer science, like, matters a lot. Like, it's obviously easy for me to sit here and be like, man, guys, like, stop talking about the computer science of the, like, that's dumb. Like, that's dumb for me to just spout that out or whatever. But it also, just is refreshing to talk back to the, like, why is it worth it? Like, what are we even doing here is helpful.
Yeah, I think there's a very, very big mission, right? And I think it's getting rid of our old monopolies and replacing them with a better system. We've learned a lot since, our current system evolved, basically since 1776, right? It's quite old at this point. So I think we can do much better. I think the world has changed dramatically. And I think we have a whole set of understanding about game theory, about social science, about how people work, about utilizing the internet, about utilizing blockchain, creating digital properties, creating sound money, creating sound finance. It's time for us, the people who understand this, the geeks, right, to change the world. And yes, I think you're right. We need to do a better job of explaining what that world looks like and how we get there.
Let's get Francis to ask a question. He's been waiting for a while. Francis, did you want to unmute?
Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, I don't have a question. I have a river of questions. Let's start with that. Okay, that's how do you call this thing? The cache thing that is going on. Oh, the tornado cache. Okay, they're sending dust attacks to well-known addresses, right? Okay, what happens if that address decides to send funds to the bridge, to the Ethereum bridge? Can that transaction be stopped? And if it can be stopped, wouldn't that make it a centralized bridge either way? And will put us in the same situation that the whole Ethereum community is right now, with censoring those transactions, like in Fusa, I don't know the name of the people that run their nodes, are pretty much blocking those people or those addresses. Wouldn't that put us in the same situation?
That's an excellent question. So just to give you an example of how seriously Sovryn takes this kind of external dependency hardening. Sovryn is the only system in the world in which tokens that are bridged don't enter the system directly. Instead, they go into an aggregator contract. So if you've ever used Sovryn, you'll see that token that was bridged, like the ETH token that was bridged, first of all, is coming through several different bridges, and more bridges are being added. But those tokens don't enter into Sovryn. Instead, what enters into Sovryn is ETH, right? ETH. Now, why is this important? Because what that means is that if one of those bridges gets compromised, the token is in the aggregator and can be moved out of the aggregator, right? And basically converted into a token from one of the other bridges. And so Sovryn as a system has airlocks around it. It's basically, I think of it in my mind, I think of it as Fortress Sovryn, right? There's this massive wall around Sovryn, which doesn't allow potentially corrupted or corruptible Trojan horses in. So, that was a huge amount of investment and continues to be a huge amount of investment in our core team. One of the reasons, the Sovryn community has built a huge amount in a short space of time in terms of like products visible to users. But what's crazy is how much underneath it has been built, right? If we were operating sort of without a view to building fundamentally solid foundations, we would have built 2 or 3 times as much, because these solid foundations are very, very complicated to build. But they are being built out. And it's also one of the reasons that Sovryn hasn't shifted from alpha to beta. It's also one of the reasons why Zero is still in limited early access, right? Because we take this idea of making sure that the core components are fundamentally sound before we try to build fancy widgets around them. So I love that question, because it's actually something I don't think I've ever discussed, why we've built the aggregators in the way that we've built the aggregators. But it means that Sovryn is the only system in the world that is immune to that kind of thing.
Okay, that answers that. Now the last questions. Let's say you get sanctioned. You Yago, you get sanctioned. How would you defend yourself and all the developers or Sovryn against that? Because if I'm not wrong, the Tornado Cash developers have been sanctioned too, and they're gonna have to go to court. So how can you protect against that too, in a personal level?
So that's a great question as well. I am one of I describe myself as pre-doxed, right? So I doxed myself and my involvement in Sovryn. Most of the developers in Sovryn operate pseudonymously. I haven't met the vast majority of them I've never met. Many of them I don't know who they are outside of their Sovryn contributor persona. But I could get arrested. It's scary. It's scary every time I fly to the US. I've been arrested before flying to the US. So what would happen if I would get arrested, right? So I think there are 2 important things. First of all, never talk to the police. That's rule number 1, right? So if I get arrested, I remain silent, right? I maintain my right to silence, and I get a really good lawyer. But that's for me. What happens to Sovryn? Well, I might be corrupted, right? I might decide that we should introduce KYC into Sovryn. And maybe I'm under enough pressure that I've been told I'm not allowed to talk about the fact that I've been arrested, and I should make this change. So what I would need to do is I would need to make a proposal. I'd need to make a SIP, and I would need to start convincing people that this is a good SIP, right? But I can't make the change myself, and that's exactly what Bitocracy is designed to defend against. The ability to make such changes. Now, I personally plan to introduce a canary, which is like a site that will sort of go down if I'm ever taken down. So it's like a quiet way of signaling that I've possibly been corrupted. It is a scary thing. But I think while Sovryn is not entirely immune to potential pressures and to potential attacks, it again has a high degree of robustness, And the primary form of that robustness comes from the fact that it is a platform that is truly, that either the contracts can't be changed at all, or where the contracts can be changed, for example, parameter changes, that they are governed directly by the meritocracy and not by some kind of multi-sig or by some individual. This is, by the way, a change that we're, we haven't fully completed that shift. There's still a few contracts that are related to a multi-sig, but we're almost at the end of that process as well.
That will answer all my questions that I had about that, and it's a relief in reality. And that will be all. The next thing that I will say is just an observation. I have noticed that when posting to other communities, they will just ban you. They don't want to hear anybody else's project. And in that case, if we want to bring attention to our project, we're gonna have to be one, coordinate the thing, and also have like a headquarters when it comes to posting media, because I have noticed that the message cannot be given because the message cannot be received in the other end. Like the cancel culture and the ban culture is a real thing. So we need to coordinate when it comes to spreading the word about Sovryn. And it's something that I have not seen just yet, or maybe I have missed it. And that will be all.
Thank you. Brian, you wanted to say something or ask something?
Yeah, that was just cool. It was cool, and that was a great question, and it was cool listening to you like flow through it. It also highlighted in a very good way also the way that kind of like NIMS and like people like can interact together in like building something. And I think that's something that's going to be crucial on like getting to like the end game that we talked about. The way that both those things interact with each other.
100%. I mean, there's a reason pseudonymity is so important. It's a fundamental right in my mind.
Flo,
and there's a reason why names and there's a reason why names are like helpful to like continue to tell the story. Like both are positive, like both are super positive.
That's right. I mean, like, I think you have to have, and there are lots of people in Sovryn who are, identifiable individuals, and I think that helps because it means that you can look at this and you can say, all right, here are people who believe in something. They're real people. They've put their reputation on the line. I think that helps. It's certainly not, Do Kwon also put his reputation on the line. It's not that in and of itself isn't a defense, but it is a signal.
What do you think about different projects, DAOs, like biting off more than they can chew? Like okay, so there are leaders like with charisma that help organize people, which is positive because humans need organization and roadmaps are helpful. And like it's helpful because we want to achieve this in our lifetime, and moving the ball down the road, like in our lifetime is like a positive thing to attempt to do. What do you make of like, but there are lots of things being tried that like the champions of those things have not thought through the gravity of what they're trying to do. And is that frustrating? Like that has to be frustrating to you. It's frustrating to me.
I've mostly made my peace with it. Like overall, more and more I'm trying to cultivate for myself a certain type of zen, which I'm also hopeful more people in the Sovryn community also pick up on, where I focus on what we can build, I focus on what we want to do, I focus on what we can do, and spend far less time engaging in, shitting on other projects, even though they deserve to be shat on. I just think our as a society, our energy has become so pessimistic, so nihilistic,
Yeah.
so cynical, so negative. I think the primary reason for that is we have lost the ability to imagine that tomorrow can be better than today.
Yeah.
And so I think all of our effort and all of our energy should go to showing how it can be.
Yeah. Off of that, for people, like, something that I tried to do then is when I would, like, the way that you can get involved as a user of open source software and of DAOs and things that are like being built is by trying them. Like, the greatest compliment you can pay to an engineer is to use their software. And that, I think, I'm not used to using open source software. Like, I use whatever the prepackaged software as a service there is for everything, you know? And so I think that takes time and growth as a user also to like mentally connect the dots between like listening to the podcast and listening to the things and envisioning this new world, and then by actually using like the software. And I say that because Bitcoiners that connect with this like message, the wallet you use to interact with Sovryn will feel different. It 100% will feel different, but it's worth it to use it. And that has helped me just think more clearly about things.
By the way, another way in which Sovryn is different from pretty much any other dApp is you can use your hardware wallet directly. You don't need to download MetaMask. You don't need any web wallet. You don't need a mobile wallet. You can just use your hardware wallet. Now, we're working to try and make it easier for you to use any kind of wallet. And we're working really, really hard on the hardest thing of all, right? Which isn't deep tech, and it isn't infrastructure, and it isn't blockchain. The hardest thing of all is front end and good UX. That's the hardest thing. Because what you're dealing with, your dependency there is not technology, it's messy people. So I think that's improving all the time, but already, and this is something I would encourage everyone who's using Sovryn to do, interact with the dApp using your hardware wallet. If you're a Bitcoiner and you have a Trezor or a Ledger or something like that, just plug it in and, go. And I think that's a very, very cool experience.
Can I ask you a question about the front end? So I'm also very interested in so I've expressed a couple times that like I think the current set of DAOs that are out there in the world are trying to bite off more than they can chew, and they're trying to coordinate projects that are very large and people that are very large. What I think feels like could be a new set of things are like autonomous software built by 2-3 people at a time that just pays them. Like, could an engineer build a front end to Sovryn that takes a 0.5% rip for rip as in fee, just takes a 0.5% fee or whatever structure, 5 sats off of each pegging or whatever. Like, do you envision that as also a suitable thing that kind of achieves this like whoever makes that front end, like front ends don't have to have tokens because they don't have to raise funds. Can't someone just bootstrap front ends and get paid cash flow off of it?
Absolutely. And I would even make it like narrower. Like if I was someone who was thinking to do something like this, I would probably pick Zero. Which is a very, very popular and very, very simple product, which has a really shitty UI.
Yeah.
And build a fucking mobile app for it.
And the reason why I've been thinking more about this is because back to then the solution, like there are a lot of engineers sitting in crypto companies that think about all this stuff day to day, but they enjoy the salaries of like the current way that startup investing happens. And so to quote unquote go to work for a DAO doesn't like, that's not compelling to an engineer that has family or whatever. And maybe I'm overglossing it, but like to me, another evidence point of this future happening is going to be lots and lots of just really quick That's the new equivalent of software as a service, is front ends to DAOs, where only a few DAOs are going to succeed in being robust enough to work through things, and then different DAO or different like front ends are going to get people paid, right?
Here's an example of something that you could do, right? So the early access to Zero is on the front end. It's actually, anyone can use like we're trying to limit the number of people using it right now, but in truth, because it's permissionless, anyone could use it. So here's an example of something that someone could do. Let's say you're an Argentinian dev. And I've been getting a bunch of messages from Argentinians saying to me, like, when can I use Zero? Why is there this early access? When's it going to end? I want to get access today. All right. So let's say, as a developer, you create a really, really easy mobile app. Maybe it's in Spanish, maybe whatever, right? And you start advertising it. And you say, hey, guys, we're offering market-beating rates. We will let you borrow Bitcoin using, and you'll only have to pay 1% interest. And you call it Bitcoin One. You don't mention Sovryn, you don't mention Zero, and you're making basically free 1%. And the whole backend is managed by this open source protocol. Anyone could do that.
Yep. Oh, perfect. Another example of that is like BTC Pay Server. Like mapping to anywhere. Like if you have the ability to, you can use it and go and build your business on it.
100%.
Cool.
All right, so Offlow was waiting a while. Did you want to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yeah. Excuse me for earlier. I lost the call. So we were talking about security and everything like that. And my question is, I noticed that the community, the Bitcoin community, we're all really awesome in our own different lights, but there tends to be a tribal narrative, whether it be people, just tribal communities, which is normal in any community. What are you guys doing, or is anyone thinking about doing this on Liquid?
So there are two reasons why the first developers who started working on Sovryn decided to work on Rootstock and on Liquid. And the two reasons are, one, Liquid doesn't have a permissionless peg. So it's a federated peg, and you have to go through a centralized intermediary in order to move your Bitcoin on or off. You can.
Wait, when you say permissionless peg, what do you mean like that? Like the peg into the blockchain?
If you have Bitcoin, you can peg your Bitcoin into Rootstock. You don't need to ask directly. You don't need to ask anyone's permission.
You can do that with Liquid.
Yeah. No. Yeah. Now, with Liquid, you can't do that. So Liquid.
Yeah, you can. Yeah, you can.
No.
You run a node and you do a pegging.
Yeah. So you can't. But what you can do with Liquid is you can do an atomic swap. So somebody else has moved Bitcoin onto the system, and you can swap your Bitcoin atomically for Bitcoin that is already on the Liquid system, right? And so that's the way they have decided to deal with these permissioned peg that they have. The issue there is that is dependent on the amount of liquidity that exists for atomic swaps, which is very, very limited.
I don't know the last time that you looked into the Liquid peg, but it's literally the same as the RSK peg. It takes 102 confirmations to peg in. It's literally the same. So I suggest looking back into that again. And if I'm wrong, please, hit me with a message. But it's the same pegging system.
Okay. Last time
the peg out is not permissionless, just like with RSK. It's literally the same system. The peg in and the peg out.
I don't know about that, but possibly something's changed and I'm unaware of it. The second reason is that Liquid is not secured by Bitcoin. Liquid is secured by a federation. So the consensus on Liquid is derived by a federation who decide on the ordering of transactions and what goes into blocks. Whereas with Rootstock, it's secured by Bitcoin proof of work and the Bitcoin miners through merge mining. There's also a third aspect, which is that Rootstock has a fully expressive Turing complete smart contracting language, which is also compatible with everything that has been built in most of the rest of the smart contracting world. And so we can use smart contracts and tooling for smart contracts that have been vetted, whereas Liquid doesn't have that. So I love the idea of sidechains, right? I think sidechains for Bitcoin are extremely important. But I agreed with the earliest assessment by the devs who were the first people working on Sovryn, that Rootstock was a far better platform on which to build for those three reasons.
So it's an interesting perspective that you have there. With Liquid, all the transactions are confidential at its base layer, so it offers a higher level of privacy at the base layer. In terms of the security, you are correct. It's RSK is merge mined with about 60% of the hash power of Bitcoin. But let's say that hypothetically the Bitcoin miners stopped mining RSK, or they got under a certain threshold. Technically, it would be the similar, or it'd be a similar system to Liquid in terms of the federation would validate the transaction. So I think that as a Bitcoin community overall, I like both the implementations. I think that they have their own different trade-offs, but I think overall as a Bitcoin community, we're very tribalistic. And I think that instead of solely being tribalistic, if we work with each other and we look at things from the different perspectives that are there, overall we can move forward. Just because generally when I go into crypto spaces and I have the conversations and the debates, the crypto people tend not to know what's going on in the Bitcoin space, and generally vice versa. And I think that the more educated we are on the different approaches that are being taken, the better we can leverage it, because we've got RGB, we've got Taro, we've got state chains, we've got space chains, we've got all this stuff in the Bitcoin space, and not fighting between each other, but just, building and being aware that there's different trade-offs, and these different trade-offs can be utilized in different ways. So a lot of people don't trust side chains, but if you don't trust side chains, you can always use Lightning. It's just it's so many different use cases. So yeah, I would keep an open mind.
I completely agree with you, with exception to one thing that you said, which is that we don't have space chains, and we don't have RGB, and we don't have Taro. These are things that we imagine having, but we don't have them.
So so just to give you a perspective, I am talking with someone who has he's not marketing it like that, but he does have an implementation of a space chain. So we might be hearing about that more in the future if things go well. Technically, we do have a state chain implementation. It's not the most perfect thing in the world. So we do have state chains. Mercury Wallet is an interesting implementation of that. In terms of RGB is in testnet. The guys at Bitmask, they're doing some interesting things on testnet. So we've got a lot of stuff going on in the Bitcoin space, and just keeping an open mind. And I'm a huge proponent of RSK. I've been telling people about RSK and the power of the fact that if you're into Ethereum today and you're a Bitcoiner, you literally can take any smart contract off of Ethereum and throw it onto RSK, and it literally shows the lack of necessity in terms of creating a new monetary asset to power an entire ecosystem. At the same time, I'm not anti-token. I see that at the end of the day, it's a free market. Tokens are going to always exist, but people looking at tokens from the perspective of the utility that the tokens have beyond solely the monetary value of the token.
Hopefully, I love what you're saying, and I want to know when we can get a Sovryn anthem.
If the Sovryn community can sponsor a Sovryn anthem, I'm already doing Sovryn music all the time. So if you all want to support the music, yeah, I'm definitely open-minded when it comes to the way I do music. It's all about the passion, and I'm all about sovereignty. That's why I'm in Bitcoin. And I think that the more people that get into Bitcoin, the better. The whole thing is, because Bitcoin is so decentralized, the communication that we have to the masses is so splintered that you've got one community, over here doing the RSK thing. You've got another community over here doing the liquid thing, another one doing the RGB thing. So I want to just be the glue that brings everyone together and bring the masses in, so that at least they can have an open mind to the options that they have in the Bitcoin space, instead of being tricked into going into crypto. Because literally, in my humble opinion, anything that's done in the crypto space can be done on Bitcoin through a second layer or a side chain, and you get to keep your Bitcoin.
So Brian, you said you had your hand up. Did you want to make a comment here?
Yeah, a couple things off of this. There's we have a supply chain problem. We're asking, so it's a good question to ask Yago and ask Sovryn, hey, cool thing, why'd you build on RSK? And then kind of talk about the details of the different side chain and layer 2 implementations, and could it work, could it not work over there. And that's interesting. The conversation is interesting, and the differences between all the options are interesting and need a ton more airtime, because there's not enough places talking about the differences between them. But what I also want to point out is that we also have a supply chain problem and a funding problem of not enough, rather than asking the Sovryn team, why did you build on RSK? I want to continually ask other people, why are you not making anything? You know what I mean? That's something that I think also needs to be talked about. And it needs to be talked about in the Ethereum versus Bitcoin kind of discussion. Why is it that so much more tinkering, quote unquote, things are being built over there rather than on XYZ, Bitcoin implementation? That is a soul searching question that should be asked and needs to be asked. But I just think it's ironic that we're going and asking the teams that do have something off the ground, details about their thing, rather than kind of hitting deeper at the heart of the issue, which is the supply chain problem and the funding problem. Both conversations are good. I just think it's interesting.
I think there's a quite simple solution to the funding problem, which is that if instead of being anti-tokens, we were pro-tokens that were built as part of the Bitcoin ecosystem, because they started building an ecosystem, a true economy around Bitcoin, then you'd start to see the Bitcoin ecosystem as well funded, if not better, than every other cockamamie, a chain that you've never heard of out there. We don't have that. By and large, as a community, we've rejected the idea that there can be any other crypto asset besides Bitcoin. And I think it's one of the things that has hurt us most. Satoshi taught us one thing: economic incentives matter. And they still do. And this sort of semi-quasi-communist idea that we should all work for the betterment of this single shared asset, which is owned by no one, I think that is a problem.
I did have a question on that note. How can Bitcoin DeFi attract other projects to build on RSK?
Well, look, I think we've had some success already in attracting other projects an ecosystem of small right now, but budding ecosystem of additional dApps and projects, wallets and other things are being built around Sovryn. Sovryn core team probably represents only about 1/3 to 1/2 of the developers who are actively engaged in Sovryn. So I think as we attract more economic activity and more users, that kind of thing will happen. I also think that as the narrative in Bitcoin community shifts to recognizing that we need to expand our mission, that will also help. So, to my mind, it's it's like any other ecosystem. It grows by it sort of grows exponentially, right? At the beginning, the growth is slow, and then almost like out of nowhere, it feels like it's surging. And that requires building out a lot of base infrastructure early on. It means that you need to have all of the core primitives. You need to have trading, you need to have lending, you need to have stable coins, you need to have good infrastructure, you need to have wallets, you need to have integrations. All of those things, have been in process over the last year and a half of Sovryn. They continue to happen. And so I think the way I think about Sovryn is it's like, it emerged in the first bull market. It grew quickly and got a lot of attention because of that. But as a result, it was forced to grow very, very quickly, sort of from day one, which is a very, very uncomfortable place to be in. I think right now it's incubating, like a lot of good projects are, right? So there's only two ways you can deal with a bear market. You can incubate or you can die. Sovryn's incubating. And I expect that, we'll start to see massive growth again when the rest of the economy sees massive growth. One of the most positive signs that we're seeing right now is that even though we're in the depth of a bear market, Sovryn is growing in terms of TVL, in terms of number of users, in terms of the revenue that it's generating, and in terms of the number of products that are being developed. And the biggest driver over the last month and a half has been Zero, which is proving to be a very, very charismatic product. And there's also Core, because Zero is the last step before we are able to introduce a sovereign dollar, which is a Bitcoin-backed, fully decentralized stablecoin. And that stablecoin is the last of the big primitives that the Sovryn ecosystem, as well as the rootstock ecosystem, doesn't properly have. So I think it is a necessary step before we can start seeing much more significant growth.
Another question in here. More people in the Bitcoin crypto Twitter space are waking up to the idea of a new nation state to defend our individual sovereignty. I think Sovryn is the only one dabbling in this idea. How far are we from seeing any real world results?
I think Yago hit on that one really good with the mortgage discussion and talking about how the way to work around the state's monopoly on violence is all through the incentives. The return on investment of violence is gonna go down in this future that's being created. And I think that honestly, that maps to the how to get more people building on RSK too. I kind of feel like the DeFi worlds that do the for-profit front end things and the mapping to real world things are going to be the ones that have the most amount of users moving forward.
Nice one. Yeah, you guys have you're kind of touching on a lot of the questions that I have in the list here. I did have one more, and it was from an anonymous person. In what ways can people outside from the Sovryn team support the vision?
Brian, you seem to have a lot of ideas around this. I'd be interested in your answer to that.
Yeah, I mean, number one is using the software. I think using the software, like trying Sovryn, is like the number one way that you can think about it.
Yeah, I think that's a really important way. One of the difficult things with Bitcoin is people don't tend to use Bitcoin. When I was looking at the donations to Ukraine, most of the donations were in other assets. More ETH was donated than Bitcoin, for example. And at Baltic Honey Badger, which is a recent Bitcoin conference, there was, a conversation about how Lightning Network is not used nearly as much as we would like. And I think generally this is in part because we haven't allowed an economy to grow around Bitcoin. So it's become a bit of an inert asset. And we've also strengthened that by creating a narrative which is just around hodling. And then we strengthened that even more by making the people that we celebrate most be people like Nayib Bukele or Michael Saylor, who are people who are buying a lot of Bitcoin. So I think we need to build out the economy around Bitcoin. We need to create more ways to use Bitcoin, and we need to create incentives to use it, which is basically the ability to get more Bitcoin, to earn interest on your Bitcoin. I saw, Brian, that you were lending out Bitcoin on Sovryn and earning a little bit of interest. And in the meantime, we as developers need to make those tools easier to use and better, right? Brian right now isn't earning that much interest. So it's important that we build out the tools that make the yields in Bitcoin in Sovryn better than anywhere else. This is a process. It's a very, very big mission. And I think Brian's right that we should pair that with a big idea and a big story about where this is all going.
Yeah. That's so let yourself dream. It sounds cheesy, but it's like if Bitcoin has CK tweets this out. He's like, no one is bullish enough on Bitcoin. And I think that's true. That comes across as just kind of a little bit cheesy, but it's also guys, if Bitcoin, full programmable money, if that happens, that was dumb for me to think that the whole nature of what a company isn't going to change, or the whole nature of things aren't going to change. If this does what we think it will do, everything changes. And so I think going to a meetup too, meeting other Bitcoiners in person to kind of start to map Bitcoin over to the real, your real meat space, existence also is another way to just kind of knock new things loose in your brain.
By the way, if anyone might organize a Sovryn meetup in their city, I think this is something we should start encouraging and helping. And if someone would like to do that in their city, DM me, and we'll try and see how we can help it to happen.
Yeah, there's certainly some ones that are coming up, actually, that are yet to be announced. So yeah, that pretty much wraps it up, guys. Thank you so much for attending. Brian, always have time for you. Really love your work. Everyone, if you want to follow everyone on Twitter, at SovrynBTC right here, at Edan Yago for Yago. Brian, it's at Brain Harrington, not Brian. So make sure you get that right if you're looking for him, at Brain Harrington. And if anyone wants to check out the Sovryn website to learn more about Zero, all that, it's sovryn.app. And also you can check out the DApp at live.sovryn.app. So yeah, thanks for everyone for joining us. Thank you, Brian.
Good stuff, guys. Thanks so much.
Yes. Stay Sovryn, everyone. Cheers.
Stay Sovryn.